UFC 312, Plessis versus Strickland 2. The UFC heads to Sydney, Australia this weekend for not the greatest card we've ever seen. I'd say some of the main card is lacking a bit, but definitely some solid fights throughout here. Let's go ahead and break down these fights, starting with Quillan Salkilld taking on Anshul Jubli in the lightweight division. Salkilld is a big favorite here. He's coming off of a Dana White Contender Series win, making his debut. I'm not sure if he's a big favorite because people really believe in his abilities or people just have that much negativity towards Anshul Jubli. Of course, Jubli went, I guess you could say, viral for all of the wrong reasons in his fight versus Mike Breeden. Guy gassed really badly in the third round. Breeden started barking at him, chanting, and ended up getting KO'd in that third round. But I think people are quick to forget that he was looking pretty good up until that point. Wobbled Breeden in the first there. Jubli, to me, looks the part of a UFC fighter. I mean, we have yet to see him really have that much success yet, but the opportunity hasn't presented itself so much. I think he's got a pretty solid all-around game, and some of the cardio issues that are the big concern with him, I think we've seen with Salkilld as well, who gassed pretty bad in his Dana White Contender Series fight. He didn't do anything really in that Contender Series matchup to blow me away. I think we can get a bit of a redemption story here for Anshul Jubli, and he can get into the win column in the UFC. Jubli by decision is the pick to kick off this card. Next up, we have Jonathan Micallef taking on Kevin Jousset. Micallef looked solid as well in his Dana White Contender Series fight. Fought out of a tight submission in the first round to get his own sub. Not a whole lot of tape there to go off of this guy, so it's hard to get a really good read on him. He's taking on Kevin Jousset, who, has had a few fights in the UFC now. He's coming off of a KO loss to Brian Battle back in September. But he's definitely a solid striker. He's got a lot more experience than Jonathan Micallef, who only has like 5 or 6 pro fights total. I expect him to rely on his judo background to not get taken down and then to just win this one on the feet. He's pretty long. He's got a good jab, and I think he takes this one by decision. So Kevin Jousset decision is the pick. Next is Rongzhu taking on Cody Steele. Steele is making his debut as well. We got 3 back-to-back Dana White Contender Series alums kicking off this card. He's had a pretty prolific BJJ career. I mean, it's hard to read into some of his jiu-jitsu fights. I was looking through his Tapology page. I mean, some of his matchups were versus like Gregory Rodriguez, who's obviously massive. Cody Steele is a lightweight. I don't know what goes on in the jiu-jitsu competitive world. Maybe those were just exhibitions. Couldn't tell you. But it's safe to assume that he's got a really strong grappling base here. And for a jiu-jitsu guy, I was pretty impressed by his striking. Definitely a lot of room for improvement. I wouldn't say he's the most athletic guy in terms of like hand speed and maybe not the most power, but he did get a KO win in that Dana White Contender Series debut. He's taking on Rongzhu, who's 1-3 in the UFC over multiple stints. He kind of signs on to the UFC, loses, goes and fights back in China and elsewhere, and then comes back like a year later and loses again. I think it's safe to say that Rongzhu really can't hang with UFC-level talent. We just haven't seen him get it done. I think Cody Steele wins this one by decision. I don't expect him to make this look as easy as perhaps the betting line would suggest, just because a lot of that striking, I think, is still needing improvement, but I think he wins this one on the cards regardless. Next is Colby Thicknesse, all-time name there, taking on Aleksandre Topuria, of course, Ilia Topuria's older brother. Topuria kind of put his career on hold to focus on Ilia, who I think was no doubt the better prospect between the two. Aleksandre did, or is it Aleksandre? I'm gonna assume it's Aleksandre. Has suffered a KO loss, but it was back when he was like 20 years old. But perhaps just that one loss was enough for him to say, like, hey, look, my brother's been having so much success. Recently, some like training footage came out of older Topuria mimicking Ryan Hall ahead of Ilya's matchup there. and looking pretty uncanny in his impression of Ryan Hall. So definitely has provided a lot of value to getting Ilya to where he is as champ today. But it's been time for him to start his UFC career. He's only 5-1, making his debut, so not a lot of fights. But obviously he's been training for a long time, and he's 29 years old, not super young, but for a guy who, it's not like he's just starting training now. Like, he's been training since he was 20 years old, obviously, so that's not too big of a concern. Thicknesse is a guy, pretty green. He showed a lot of grit in the fight I watched of him, so he's not a guy who's just going to go away easily. But I think Topuria is going to be far more skilled, far more athletic. He just looks physically stronger. I think he's just going to impose his will and find a submission. People forget that the Topurias are really grapplers first, and I think Aleksandre will remind people of that in his matchup versus Colby Thicknesse. Next up is Wang Cong taking on Bruna, Brasil. Man, that hype train got derailed pretty quickly for Wang Cong. I'm still a believer. Of course, she started off her UFC career with a ridiculous round 1 KO. Not many, women's strawweights have that type of one-punch power, especially in a punch that she threw. Like, it's not like she's just throwing all of her weight into it. It looked like very well balanced and stuff. She obviously has a very skilled kickboxing pedigree. Of course, she has a win over Valentina Shevchenko like a decade ago. So, yeah, I think people expected her to just be on the Poatan track and just get, pushed right to the top of the division immediately. That didn't happen, but this is a good fight for her to get back on track versus Bruna, Brasil, who I think is going to turn this into a kickboxing fight that she's just going to really not have much of a chance of winning versus the far more skilled and powerful Wang Cong. I think Wang Cong wins this one by decision. Nolan versus Viacheslav Borshchev is next in the lightweight division. This fight is headed for a finish either way. It's probably going to end up who lands cleaner first. Borshchev is probably the more skilled striker between these two. He works the body really well. He's got a few body shot KOs, definitely more than most other fighters ever get in their careers. He just knows how to find people's livers and put them down. But the guy has literally no wrestling whatsoever, and hasn't looked like he's really made many strides in improving that. We don't know what Nolan is really capable of in the grappling, when it comes to grappling, because most of his fights haven't lasted long enough to get too involved in grappling. He looks for KOs. He's a really tall guy, and he throws these knees up the middle that are pretty devastating. I think Nolan gets the KO in this one. It's really, you might as well just, bet on the Super Bowl coin toss, because I think that's what this is pretty much going to come down to. It's going to be just whoever lands first, and so I think Nolan is going to do that. Next up is Jenkins taking on Gabriel Santos in the featherweight division. Really tough fight here. I think both these guys are pretty impressive prospects. Santos, for my money, had one of the best featherweight performances of the year versus Yijia. The guy had one of those just like almost like Steph Curry, like everything he shot was going in. He just could not miss. He was landing knees, front kicks, elbows. The guy was just absolutely flowing versus Yijia. It was maybe not the strongest opponent, but we definitely saw that Gabriel Santos at the height of his powers is truly impressive. Jenkins has yet to really lose in the UFC. His one loss came from like a bizarre arm injury, so I'm not going to hold that against him. He has awesome leg kicks. Like, he gets so much torque into them, almost like Gaethje-esque, where he really hurts guys. Like, it doesn't take many of those to compromise his opponent, as Joe Rogan would say. He's a stockier guy. Santos is going to be a bit lankier. I think Santos just has more weapons, to be honest. I think his hands are a bit better, and he's more proven I think he's just going to give more looks, where Jenkins, we've yet to see him really mix in some of the other striking beyond the leg kicks to as much success as we've had Santos do so. So I'm taking Santos to win this one by a decision. That should be an awesome fight. Both guys are super tough. Next up is a welterweight matchup between Jake Matthews and Francisco Prado, which I was surprised to see because Prado, I wasn't sure why he's moving up to 170. He's had all of his UFC fights at 155, and it's not like he was some super big, tall guy in the lightweight division. But, I mean, he's only 22 years old. There's a good chance he's just growing. Like, your body's still going through a lot of changes at that age. Maybe this is a good move for him. That remains to be seen. But I like Prado's game. He's pretty wild. He throws a lot of crazy strikes, but he finds ways to land them, and he's just pressure. I like his aggressiveness a lot. Jake Matthews, on the other hand, is a bit slower, I'd say, a bit more composed, conventional even. He's had ups and downs throughout his career, has Jake Matthews. He's never really had any bad losses, but he hasn't been able to really string together any big win streaks. He kind of just loses against the top guys and then beats a lot of the lower level guys. This one's a big toss-up. Matthews has a ton of experience over Francisco Prado, but I really like Prado's aggressiveness. I think maybe this move to 170 could be good for him. It's not like Jake Matthews is a super tall guy either, so that shouldn't be that big of an issue. I think Prado is just going to drown Jake Matthews in his pressure. He's going to keep Matthews uncomfortable, and I think he finds a KO in this one. Next up is a light heavyweight matchup between Jimmy Crute and Rodolfo Bellato. Crute has had a rough go of it lately. I mean, just to sum up his last 4 fights, he had a loss, a draw, a loss, and then some weird loss versus Anthony Smith. I think it was the injury, the leg kick or something. He just has not been having a good time. But I think the potential still is there for Jimmy Crute. He had those pair of fights against Alonzo Menafield, and he wasn't able to come away successful versus either of them. But I think he had moments in those fights, especially the first one. I think he's the far more fluid athlete to Rodolfo Bellato, who's kind of got the Kevin Jousset stance, stiff as a board, doesn't move his head really at all. I think he's going to leave a lot of openings for Jimmy Crute to land. And Crute has shown some solid wrestling as well in the past, where I think he could give Bellato some issues there. I mean, Bellato got hit a lot versus Ior Potieria before he ended up getting the KO over Potieria. So Bellato, really, he's been winning, but I don't think it's been against the strongest opponents. I think Crute can get back in the win column here with a decision over Rodolfo Bellato. Next up, and we are on the main card at this point, is Justin Tafa taking on Tallison Teixeira in the heavyweight division. Teixeira is absolutely massive. He's 6'6", 6'7". Not the most muscular guy, but definitely powerful. He had a one-punch, walk-off KO in his Dana White Contender Series fight, but he was fighting pretty much a light heavyweight in that fight, if that. I mean, I think some light heavyweights are probably bigger than his opponent in that matchup. He supposedly has some grappling skills. I mean, I think he's got a few submissions under his belt. So if he gets Justin Tafa to the ground, I think the fight's pretty much good as over. But I don't really see that happening. Tafa's, really strong. He's super stocky, of course. But we saw Tallison Teixeira take a lot of punches in his Dana White Contender Series fight that I think any one of those punches coming from Justin Tafa would put him out cold. So his defensive striking defense definitely concerns me. I think Tafa can get a walk-off KO here versus Tallison Teixeira, who tends to leave a lot of openings, and the margin of error is so slim versus a guy as powerful as Justin Tafa. We're taking Tafa by round 1 KO. And we have our co-main event up next. It's Zhang Weili taking on Tatiana Suarez for the strawweight belt. Super interesting fight here. I was shocked to see that Zhang Weili is an underdog, although it's very slight. But this title shot for Tatiana Suarez is a long time coming. I mean, she's had the documentary made about her and stuff, so she's kind of been building her name for many years. and she made her debut in 2016. So she's been training for a long time. Like, this has been, in the works for a while now. But she only has like 10, 11 pro fights. And I think a lot of that is due to injuries she sustained over her career. I think she's had a couple ACL tears. So just has been overcoming that. And I think there's no doubt that, overcoming that has probably made her stronger. But it has kind of delayed, I'd say, where she probably thought she would be by this time if you had asked her a few years ago when she was really hot. Her wrestling is top-notch, and she's really big for the division, so I think those are her two biggest strengths are, her size and wrestling. Like, people will stuff her takedown initially, and she just has the strength to power through it and to just still land the takedown. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Zhang Weili, who's, not the biggest strawweight. I wouldn't be surprised to see her stuff a takedown and still end up on her back versus Tatiana. But all that being said, I think Weili is the better fighter all around. I think on the feet, we're going to see a big skill difference, definitely a speed difference, where Weili is going to be a lot quicker, a lot faster hands, faster kicks. And we've never really seen Zhang Weili get, dominated in the grappling, and we've never really seen anyone beat her, not named Rose Namajunas. So Zhang Weili, perhaps she regressed a bit in that Yan Xiaonan fight, although it's hard to say that when she pretty much dominated that whole fight. But I think you saw some concerns with, cardio and stuff, and Xiaonan definitely had her moments. But Weili, just, there's no weaknesses, really. You got to really fight a perfect fight to beat her. I think if you had, intergender pound-for-pound rankings, I'd have a hard time not putting her in, probably the top 6 or 7 in the UFC. She's that good. I'm taking Zhang Weili to win by decision. Finally, we have our main event. It is Dricus du Plessis taking on Sean Strickland. The rematch here, of course, the first fight was for the belt. Pretty controversial decision. I don't know, maybe 55% of the people judging it themselves. 60% had it for Strickland. I personally had it for Sean. And I bet on, I picked DDP in that first fight, I believe. But I scored it for Sean. Really tough fight. I mean, after rewatching it, I was just reminded of how close that was. But, you definitely saw the damage difference. Sean landed a lot more shots, a lot cleaner shots in that matchup. I think Sean gets a lot of slack for his style, and it hasn't changed really at all throughout his middleweight career. I mean, he fights the same. He had the same approach versus Alex Pereira. He's going to have the same approach versus DDP. He had a very typical Strickland performance versus Paulo Costa, where he pretty much just walked Costa down the whole time and Costa moved backwards. So it's going to be up to DDP to really force the issue if he wants to get his own offense off. This is a really close fight. I mean, DDP, he kind of has this almost spastic, crazy energy to him where he gives off the vibe that he has no idea what he's doing, but then whatever he attempts just works. Whether it's the headbutt to the hip or just the crazy rugby tackle takedown. The guy just, never really looks good doing it, but he almost always is effective. So he's really impressive in that regard. This is a really tough fight. I have been a big fan of, Strickland's fighting style, and he was my dark horse of the division for a long time, and I think for good reason. And I do think he won that first fight, and I don't see why he can't have a similarly or better performance in the rematch here. We're taking Sean by decision. I think he lands a lot of punches. I think he pretty much dwarfs DDP's numbers in the significant strike column. It'll be up to him to, fight off the takedowns. I think DDP is going to want to, muscle him, but he runs the risk of gassing out if he does do that. So Strickland by decision is going to be the pick there. And that's the breakdown. Like, subscribe, comment, let me know who you're picking down below. We'll be back for another breakdown next week. Peace.